My name is Leuren Moret. I'm a geoscientist. I've been in 50 countries. I worked in 2 nuclear weapons labs as a geoscientist. I am a Quaker, so I do not work on weapons of war. I don't believe in war. And I'm doing this to educate and inform the public about what is happening to public health and the health of the environment because of the weapons that are being used now that affect the entire biosphere and the entire planet. As you know, on March 11th, an earthquake was detected or measured off the coast of Japan. That's Fukushima province, prefecture in red. I've been very, very fortunate to be invited 20 times on speaking tours to Japan since the year 2000. And even though I had worked in 2 nuclear weapons labs, the Lawrence Berkeley lab where the Manhattan Project started, and the Lawrence Livermore lab in Livermore, which is about 45 miles southeast from Berkeley, where I live, I knew nothing about nuclear weapons. I just heard people talking about big mushroom clouds, and I just had no idea what the effects are until I was invited to Japan in the year 2000 because I was a whistleblower on the Yucca Mountain Project in Nevada, which is the most important public works project the U.S. has ever undertaken. And it was to construct an underground repository for all of the nuclear waste produced in the United States from, first of all, the nuclear weapons program, after with the Manhattan Project that never ended, and the nuclear power industry. They produce highly radioactive, very toxic waste, and depleted uranium and other Navy weapons and reactors, and the space program. Very, very radioactive plutonium that's much hotter than what they use in nuclear bombs is produced for power supplies in spacecraft. And Carl Grossman has written very good books about it. He's a really good investigative journalist, but he's also a professor, and he's a friend of mine. So the U.S. has been producing nuclear waste since even before World War II with nowhere to store it. So all this nuclear waste is sitting at the facilities that generated it, and there's still nowhere to put it. When I was working at Livermore, I was doing geochemistry research on the WIP project in New Mexico. That's the Waste Isolation Pilot Project. And the Norwegians, the Finns, the Swedish, the Swedes have underground nuclear waste repositories in crystalline rock. In other words, granite or very, very solid rock bodies. Maybe in the 60s or 70s, when nuclear energy was getting going, a senator in, I think it was Vermont or New Hampshire, knew that most of the nuclear power plants would be on the East Coast, and he didn't want that nuclear waste on the East Coast, and he didn't want it in his state. So he passed a law in Congress prohibiting the storage of nuclear waste in any crystalline rock. The safest place to put it, even there it's not safe. But he absolutely sabotaged the ability for the United States to safely store nuclear waste. And the New Mexico, the NRC, and before that the Atomic Energy Commission. NRC is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that succeeded the AEC. They went from state to state to state to state and they got kicked out of every single state, not only by the citizens, by the elected officials as well. It was unanimous. It's the one time America has been, any state was really completely unanimous between politicians and citizens. So it ended up in New Mexico, where the Los Alamos lab is, and it ended up in an underground salt deposit from a Permian ocean many millions of years before. I was at Livermore working on the geochemistry, and I heard about it. I didn't really know very much about it. I was busy in labs, you know, talking to people and doing whatever. But then they moved it. Well, what happened is the New Mexico legislature voted to allow that pilot project in New Mexico. But they demanded that the federal government build a whole new infrastructure of freeways and highways in New Mexico. As soon as the freeways and highways were completed, the legislature voted that no nuclear waste could be transported on highways and freeways in New Mexico. So the government had to regroup, reorganize, and they picked the Nevada test site where 1,300 nuclear weapons tests have been conducted. And those nuclear weapons tests have destroyed the health and the mental health and the health of the environment of the entire United States. The SAT scores for all children who took them in the United States declined 12% from children born in 1945 who were not exposed to any ionizing radiation until children born in 1963 were exposed to peak levels in 1963 when the U.S. military and the nuclear establishment detonated 250 nuclear weapons at the Nevada test site because they knew the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty would end their ability to do atmospheric testing. It takes 2 years to set up a nuclear weapons test. How they did it, 250 in 1 year, I have no idea. But I bet it was with baling wire and chewing gum a whole lot of the way. And when I began to investigate HAARP, which is the new weapon of mass destruction, replacing the nuclear weapons in the U.S. military arsenal, I understood why so many atmospheric tests had been done, and that they were co-developing with the Soviet Union HAARP, the new weapon of mass destruction, in order to weaponize the atmosphere and the energy of the universe, the energy in our environment, the energy in natural systems and natural events. They had to understand how the atmosphere worked. Well, we didn't have research labs up there high up in the atmosphere. So what they had to do was to inject huge amounts of ionized particles, and that's what comes out of nuclear bombs, into the Earth's magnetic field and study the behavior of those particles as they interacted with the magnetic field. And so that's why the Soviets did those huge hydrogen bomb tests in the Arctic. And Dr. Leuren, who was a Canadian doctor in Alberta, studied the biological impact of all that radiation. And Canadian doctors were able to calculate that every person in the northern hemisphere received the equivalent of an X-ray, a chest X-ray, from those nuclear bomb tests. So we've been nuclear guinea pigs since 1945. So the WIP project was moved to the Yucca Mountain Project in Nevada, and I was at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab when the canisters storing the nuclear waste came back from WIPP and from Yucca Mountain, and the bacteria in 5 years had eaten the canisters that cost $2.5 billion to make, along with the Yucca Mountain tunnels and everything. And it's basically, the bacteria ate the beer can and left the beer. So, America's most important public works project ended up in the courts about 5 years ago in Washington, D.C., and the judge said to the Department of Energy, number one, you have guaranteed the nuclear waste will be safe only 10,000 years, but the National Academy of Sciences, which is the highest scientific authority, recommended 250,000 years. Your science is science fraud, so I'm ordering you to throw everything out and start all over again. That $2.5 billion that got them into that courtroom was ratepayers' money. So nuclear power, nuclear weapons are not compatible with life, and they're the most expensive weapons that have ever been developed on this planet. What species kills their young for energy? What species kills their young for security? What species kills their young for power? None. It's complete insanity. So, I'm going to talk now about the aftermath of nuclear power and how very, very dangerous it is now that Fukushima has happened. Fukushima is located on the east side of the sort of northern side of Honshu, which is the main island in Japan. And offshore, a couple of hundred miles offshore from Fukushima, where 2 nuclear power plants are located on the shore, on the beach of that side of the island. All of the nuclear power plants, almost all of them in Japan, are right on the beach or right next to the ocean, so they can use the seawater for cooling. An earthquake of magnitude 9.1 occurred at 12:46 a.m. on Friday, March 11th. A magnitude 9 earthquake releases the energy that would be released by 1 million Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. And what this HARP system, this new weapon of war, is doing is it's artificially triggering natural events that release huge amounts of energy that can be used as a destructive force. That earthquake that occurred at 12:46 a.m. was followed by a 30 or 35-foot tsunami. Now, Japan has a history of tsunamis. Japan has a history of earthquakes. So temples and Edo period farmhouses and older buildings are built without a single nail in them, or screw or bolt. They're all wood, and they're constructed so that they rock and move with the earthquakes, and they're left standing when the earthquake is over. Indigenous technology cannot be improved on. If we return to indigenous technology, we would be much better off, we would be much safer, we would be producing food that is 5 times more nutritious than what we're eating now, and with indigenous agricultural technologies, you produce 10 times as much food. So, I'm all for indigenous. That earthquake and tsunami flooded the reactor buildings. There are 6 reactors at the Fukushima #1 plant, and I think there are 4 more at the Fukushima #2 plant.